I think the British officers sent to Libya have two functions. One of them is liaison, the other is advisory. The liaison function is specifically to avoid situations like that which occurred last week, where NATO bombed a rebel convoy because it didn't realize the rebels were operating tanks. So that sort of information will have to flow between NATO and the rebels via these intermediaries. The advisory function is essentially how do they use some of the advanced weapons they're receiving. So for example, some of the French-made anti-tank weapons supplied by Qatar. But not only how to use these weapons, also how can they transform themselves into a factional, divided military organization, into something with much more cohesion and hierarchical structure.
I think the idea behind this is to provide some good liaison. Remember, this is a very small team that is going in, senior people, who will do a needs assessment. So they'll be able to give London a much better idea as to what is really happening, what are the strengths and weaknesses of both the opposition forces and the Gaddafi forces. They can't do training. There's not enough of them. There isn't enough time. This is literally a liaison group, but it does represent an increased political commitment. So in that respect, it's a sensible thing to do, but it's also a slightly risky political thing to do, because it is the British and the French taking a much more direct part in what is now a civil war in Libya.
Well, interventions often begin with the injection of military advisors, which are then a precursor to much larger commitments. That was not only the case with Vietnam and America's sending of advisors, but also the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan in the 1980s. I think the parallel here is misleading. Firstly, because there are strong legal constraints on what can be sent. UN Resolution 1973 forbids any kind of foreign occupation force. But not only that, we're having this discussion in the shadow of Iraq. And 10 years after we've seen two major land wars in Asia and the Middle East, there is simply no appetite at all in the defense or foreign policy bureaucracies of Western Europe and North America to send large numbers of troops to fight in complex, messy urban warfare.
I don't think this is the beginning of a ground operation in Libya. I think there's no chance of ground forces, British ground forces, being deployed unless there is another United Nations resolution which either rescinds the caveat in 1973, the existing resolution, or creates a resolution which supersedes it. Now, we know that a commando force is on its way through the Mediterranean for maneuvers in the eastern Mediterranean. That has probably got much more to do with Syria than it has with Libya. So people have put two and two together and said, well, we've got a team now in Benghazi, we've got a commando, elements of a commando brigade passing Tripoli by sea. Surely this is all part of a conspiracy. Believe me, the British government will not put troops on the ground whilst Resolution 1973 expressly forbids it. It would be foolish in the extreme to go beyond the terms of reference, the explicit terms of reference of that particular UN Security Council resolution. If things change at the United Nations, then we might be into a new situation, but I see no prospect of that at the moment.
The real concern is how will states within NATO respond? States like Turkey, Germany, others who are already on the edge, already wary, will they consider this an unacceptable expansion of the objective? And the answer is probably not now, but if this continues in 2 months' time, that's when they may deem this to be an excessive interpretation of UN Resolution 1973.
I think it'll be very, very interesting to see how the Arab League respond to this, because ultimately the most important voice in this whole international operation around Libya is that of the Arab League. The most important aspect is not the United Nations, which provides the legal basis for it, nor in a sense the British and the French and the Americans and the Danes and so on, who are doing some of the flying. But the most important political voice is the Arab League. It was because the Arab League called for international intervention on the 17th of March that it took place. And if the Arab League were to withdraw support, then I think the whole operation would have to stop. Politically, it's as simple as that. So we will see. I don't know how the Arab League will react to this move. I hope they react positively, but they will have to think about it. And you know, my comment to the Arab League is welcome to the real world of power and responsibility. If you call for military interventions, you have to live with a lot of the consequences, and it's very uncomfortable. Welcome.